Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Hello.
Our mission here, well, it's pretty straightforward. We take a whole stack of information, articles, reports, news headlines, and we cut through all the noise.
Yeah, we boil it down to the most important insights just for you.
Think of it as getting that essential download without having to wade through, hours and hours of material yourself.
Exactly. We're here to help you get well informed, fast, and hopefully insightfully too.
Absolutely. And today we're plunging into some pretty major recent developments across the Asia Pacific.
A big region to cover.
It is. We're looking at Japan, Korea, China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, the whole sweep.
And we're putting a particular focus on maritime strategy, right?
Yeah.
And global shipping.
That's right. Especially highlighting a really significant collaboration that's emerging between China and Russia, specifically up in the Arctic.
The Arctic dimension. That's where geopolitics really meets geography and, well, climate change. It's creating dynamics with potentially massive implications.
Yeah, huge implications, not just for the region, but, for global trade, strategic balance, everything.
And we've got a good mix of sources to draw on.
We do. Analysis from the Wilson Center, news from AP, South China Morning Post, CNA, BBC, NHK, New Straits Times, Taipei Times, Korea Herald. Quite a range.
Okay, a lot packed in there. Let's get started.
Right, let's kick things off. Let's unpack this fascinating development that came up in several sources, China's growing activity in the Arctic.
Yeah, it's not the first place you think of when you think of China, is it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
And what's really striking is how China's deliberately branding itself. They're calling themselves a near-Arctic state.
Near Arctic. Considering, they don't actually border the Arctic Circle at all.
Exactly. So that label, it tells you something. It's a conscious, strategic declaration. They're signaling intent, claiming a stake.
It feels like, yeah, a subtle but important piece of geopolitical positioning.
And the sources make it clear this isn't just talk. Beijing has been, well, pretty aggressively pursuing access to the Northern Sea route.
Right. This isn't just passive interest. It's an active strategic push. And a huge part of this, enabling it, is that specific collaboration with Russia.
Okay, so what does that collaboration actually look like? On the ground or maybe on the ice?
Well, it means building these pretty substantial partnerships, making significant investments too.
Investments towards what goal?
The goal, according to the sources, is tapping directly into those Arctic trade lanes. And of course, the natural resources up there.
Ah, so it's logistics and resources, both. And speaking of tapping into routes, the SCMP had a really telling detail.
Oh yeah, the bit about the Russian operator, the one
Yeah.
managing the Northern Sea route.
That's the one.
They're actively building more nuclear-powered icebreakers?
Nuclear icebreakers, that's not a small investment.
No way. It really speaks to a long-term vision, a
Yeah.
commitment to making that route viable, maybe even year-round eventually, or close to it.
Serious infrastructure. It suggests they're expecting heavy traffic, maybe significant challenges too, even with the ice melting.
Definitely. And based on all this, the collaboration, the investment, the sources are anticipating a pretty significant rise in voyages
Yeah.
by Chinese companies using these Arctic routes.
Which brings us to the big question. Why? Why this really determined push for Arctic routes? What's the strategic payoff here?
Well, the implications seem pretty clear from the sources, but they are profound. First off, it's about securing alternative routes.
Alternative routes. You mean bypassing the usual spots?
Exactly, like Suez or Panama. Channels that can get congested or caught up in geopolitics or, controlled by other powers.
Yeah.
Having these Arctic options adds resilience, reduces reliance on choke points.
Makes sense. And at the same time, by building up this presence, getting influence over these, well, future major trade arteries.
They increase their leverage, their influence over global trade itself. It's basic geography, really. Control the routes, control the flow.
And it's fascinating how environmental change, the melting ice, is directly feeding into this geopolitical strategy.
It really is. This isn't just theoretical anymore. The Russia-China collaboration plus a changing climate means we could be seeing brand new, economically significant shipping routes opening up, maybe much sooner than we thought.
So the melting ice isn't just an environmental story anymore. It's a catalyst for a major geopolitical and economic shift in shipping.
Precisely. New physical geography is becoming, well, strategically significant geography.
Now let's connect this Arctic push to the broader picture. The sources really highlight China's systematic expansion of maritime dominance globally. The Arctic is just one theater, right?
Exactly. It's one piece of a much larger puzzle.
Yeah.
And this bigger picture is laid out, well, quite starkly in some of the analysis, especially from the Wilson Center source.
Yeah, the contrast it draws between China and the U.S. on maritime capability. It's genuinely eye-opening.
It really puts the scale into perspective. The source says China's ocean-going merchant fleet is over 5,500 vessels.
Over 5,500, okay, and the U.S.
The U.S. controls,
Yeah.
wait for it, a mere 80.
80, just 80, that number is. Wow. It just underscores this huge reliance on foreign shipping for almost everything that moves by sea.
It's immense. And it's not just the ships on the water now, is it? It's about building them too.
Shipbuilding capacity.
Future capability. And according to the source, China's capacity doesn't just exceed America's. It dwarfs it by a factor of 232.
232 times. That's almost hard to grasp. It's a fundamental difference in industrial scale.
And strategic priority, I guess.
Absolutely. And beyond the ships, you need the ports, the infrastructure.
And that's another key area of China's expansion.
Yes, through the Maritime Silk Road Initiative, they've invested in over 100 ports worldwide. But the crucial bit isn't just the money, it's gaining operational control over these key nodes.
Key points in the global shipping network. The source gave examples, didn't it?
Yeah, powerful ones, like China's control over the port of Piraeus in Greece, a major European gateway, or Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, right there in the Indian Ocean. Strategic spots. Not random locations at all. And what's really maybe concerning, according to the source, is that even inside the U.S.
Right. Even within the U.S. itself, the vast majority of port terminals are controlled by foreign entities. Now, that's not automatically bad.
But when you see it alongside China's global port strategy.
It highlights a potential vulnerability, a significant one.
So it's about who controls the physical gates of trade, globally and domestically. But it's not just physical anymore, is it? There's a digital layer, too.
Exactly. The source details China's growing digital control over logistics.
Through that software, Loyum Tech.
Yes, state-backed software. It gives real-time tracking, management of cargo shipments.
And how widespread is it?
Pretty extensive. The source notes it's not just in China. It's used in key hubs like Japan, South Korea, major European ports.
Wow. So what kind of leverage does that give, having that real-time visibility across huge parts of the global supply chain?
Well, it provides immense data, insights.
Yeah.
Basically gives China this unique window into global commerce. And that visibility, well, it can translate into economic leverage, potentially be exploited in disputes. You know, they can see vulnerabilities others might miss.
Has there been any pushback on that?
Well, the U.S. Congress banned the Pentagon from using ports that rely on LOJINC.
Mm-hmm.
But commercial trade, which is, most shipping, that remains largely exposed, according to the source.
And the military implications of all this, controlling ships, ports, data, they must be significant.
That's a crucial point the Wilson Center source makes, often overlooked. In a major conflict.
Yeah.
The U.S. military relies heavily, the source estimates up to 90% on commercial shipping for equipment, supplies, cargo, everything.
90%. So if the U.S. doesn't have its own big commercial fleet and it depends on foreign ships or ports controlled by, say, a potential adversary like China.
That dependency becomes a major strategic vulnerability. China could potentially disrupt or even deny the very logistics lifeline the U.S. military needs in a crisis.
It really raises fundamental questions about projecting power, sustaining operations, if your logistical tail is effectively held by someone else.
Precisely.
So, given this picture, China's strategic integrated approach, how does the source describe the U.S. response?
Basically as disjointed,
Yeah.
fragmented. The argument is that while different parts of the U.S. government see parts of the problem,
They're not quite connecting the dots.
or their efforts are scattered across too many agencies without a single unified strategy or enough coordination.
Okay, let's break down some of the specific actions mentioned. Agency by agency, DoD and transportation, working with Murad.
Right, they're trying to secure U.S. seaports, military logistics, and DoD is also building new naval infrastructure like in the Philippines, clearly about forward presence.
Makes sense. Then you have Homeland Security, DHS, and the Coast Guard.
They're involved in monitoring that foreign control aspect over U.S. ports. The source specifically mentions concerns about those Chinese-made cranes in U.S. ports, potential intelligence gathering, that sort of thing.
Okay. And Treasury. Through CFUS, the committee that reviews foreign investments.
They have taken action, notably forcing China's state-owned Coasco to sell its stake in the Long Beach container terminal. That was a big one.
What about the commercial side? unfair practices.
That's where the Federal Maritime Commission, the FMC, comes in,
Yeah.
investigating shipping practices, touching on the economic side of foreign control.
And internationally, trying to offer alternatives to China's port investments.
That falls to the State Department and the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, USIDFC. They try to offer financing alternatives. But the source suggests they often struggle to compete financially with Beijing's state-backed scale.
Right. And finally, the National Security Council.
The source notes the NSC has a new role focused on maritime risk, trying to bring higher-level attention. But it's described as pretty nascent and, crucially, lacking the actual authority to compel action across all these different agencies.
So the core argument from the source is lots of activity, but piecemeal, uncoordinated, especially when you contrast it with China's seemingly strategic, unified, long-term approach. Military, economic, tech, diplomatic, all pushing in the same direction on maritime dominance.
That's the picture painted, yes.
All right, let's shift gears now, move away from that deep dive on maritime strategy, and quickly scan some other significant recent news highlights from across the Asia-Pacific, drawing from those other news sources we mentioned.
Okay, stepping back for the broader view, just snapshots of different dynamics across the region.
Starting with India, several sources reported on a really tragic event, the Air India crash.
Yes, AP, SCMP, Straits Times, Korea Herald all covered it. A devastating incident. 241 people on board died, and sadly, several people on the ground, too.
Just terrible. The sources also noted there was only one survivor.
One sole survivor, yes. And investigators did manage to recover the black box, which is obviously crucial for figuring out what went wrong.
Okay. Shifting over to Taiwan, Taipei Times and AP reported on the earthquake near Hualien.
Yeah, on the East Coast. A reminder of the natural disaster risks in that part of the world.
Definitely. And also related to Taiwan, but on the security side, the Taipei Times mentioned U.S. Navy war games.
Right. Exercises reportedly aimed specifically at deterring a potential Chinese invasion, focusing on making Taiwan a very difficult target.
Northeast from there, Japan. AP News noted an incident with military planes.
Yeah, an encounter between Chinese fighter jets and Japanese planes. Close proximity. And predictably, perhaps, both sides blaming the other.
Just highlights the ongoing tensions, the risks in the airspace there.
Tensions also featured in news from Korea. AP and Korea Herald reported South Korea making a move to ease things with the North.
What was that?
They announced they'd halt propaganda broadcasts along the border. A clear de-escalation step, seems like.
Interesting. Down in Southeast Asia, Vietnam made a notable international move.
Yes, SCMP reported Vietnam officially joined BRICS. Not as a full member right away, but as a partner country. Brazil made the announcement. Shows Vietnam extending its ties.
And a slightly less geopolitical but still interesting spat between Cambodia and Thailand. AP reported on that.
Ah, yes. Cambodia banned Thai movies and TV shows. Apparently a tit-for-tat thing in some ongoing border dispute. Culture getting caught in the crossfire.
Happens all the time. And in Hong Kong, news about security cooperation with the mainland.
AP highlighted what's reported as the first publicly known joint national security operation. Mainland Chinese and Hong Kong authorities working together. That's pretty significant for how security is managed there now.
Yeah, definitely a development to watch. Finally, back to China and trade. AP mentioned rare earth export permits.
Right, China granted some permits after talks with the U.S., and the source pointed out how critical minerals like rare earths give China significant leverage in these kinds of negotiations.
A key bargaining chip. And there were other brief mentions too, right? Mongolia's new PM, Turkey selling jets to Indonesia, those Chinese scientists in the U.S.
Yeah, biosmuggling cases. Just underscores the sheer breadth of activity across this huge dynamic region. So much going on.
So we've covered quite a sweep today. From that strategic maneuvering in the Arctic, opening up new shipping possibilities,
to the bigger picture of China's expanding maritime power, the fleet, the ports, the data.
and then that rapid scan of other key news events across the Asia-Pacific.
It really shows how these seemingly separate things, climate change, maritime control, security incidents, trade talks, even cultural spats, are all interconnected.
Absolutely. They're threads in this incredibly complex fabric of the region and increasingly the whole global landscape. Understanding the pieces helps you see the bigger patterns, the potential shifts coming.
Indeed. Each bit of information helps paint a clearer, though still complex picture of the forces at play.
Absolutely. And well, that brings our depth dive for today to a close.
Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you for joining us.